after losing nearly everything, including his entire crew with one exception. And finally rejoining the retreat, Lieutenant Henry found himself in the precarious position of being falsely accused of abandoning his unit and possibly thought to be a German spy. He was pulled from the crowd, led down the bank of a rushing river, and awaiting his imminent assassination at the hands of the Italian military police, Frederick jumps into the icy water of the Tagliamento. Now he finds himself tethered to a large piece of timber, drifting aimlessly in a desperate attempt to cling to the hope of surviving with his life. My name is Tricia Sulpizio. I'm your host for Tea and Bedtime Stories. In this episode, we'll continue reading Ernest Hemingway's novel, A Farewell to Arms. Last time we read and discussed Chapter 30 of Book 3, and now I'll continue the story with Chapter 31. After the reading, I'll follow up with a few quick facts and my impressions. So we'll begin reading Chapter 31 of Book 3. You do not know how long you are in a river when the current moves swiftly. It seems a long time, and it may be very short. The water was cold and in flood, and many things passed that had been floated off the banks when the river rose. I was lucky to have a heavy timber to hold on to, and I lay in the icy water with my chin on the wood, holding as easily as I could with both hands. I was afraid of cramps, and I hoped we would move toward the shore. We went down the river in a long curve. It was beginning to be light enough so that I could see the bushes along the shoreline. There was a brush island ahead, and the current moved toward the shore. I wondered if I should take off my boots and clothes and try to swim ashore, but decided not to. I had never thought of anything but that I would reach the shore some way, and I would be in a bad position if I landed barefoot. I had to get to Mestre some way. I watched the shore come close and then swing away, then come closer again. We were floating more slowly. The shore was very close now, and I could see twigs on the willow brush. The timber swung slowly so that the bank was behind me, and I knew we were in an eddy. We went slowly around as I saw the bank again very close now. I tried holding with one arm and kicking and swimming the timber toward the bank with the other. I did not bring it any closer. I was afraid we would move out of the eddy, and holding with one hand, I drew up my feet so that they were against the side of the timber and shoved hard toward the bank. I could see the brush, but even with my momentum and swimming as hard as I could, the current was taking me away. I thought then I would drown because of my boots, but I thrashed and fought through the water, and when I looked up, the bank was coming toward me, and I kept thrashing and swimming in a heavy-footed panic until I reached it. I hung to the willow branch and did not have the strength to pull myself up, but I knew I would not drown now. It had never occurred to me on the timber that I might drown. I felt hollow and sick in my stomach and chest from the effort, and I held to the branches and waited. When the sick feeling was gone, I pulled into the willow bushes and rested again, my arms around some brush, holding tight with my hands to the branches. Then I crawled out, pushed on through the willows onto the bank. It was half daylight, and I saw no one. I lay flat on the bank and heard the river and the rain. After a while, I got up and started along the bank. I knew there was no bridge across the river until La Tisana. I thought I might be opposite San Vito. I began to think out what I should do. Ahead there was a ditch running into the river. I went toward it. So far I'd seen no one, and I sat down by some bushes along the bank of the ditch and took off my shoes and emptied them of water. I took off my coat, took my wallet out with my papers and my money all wet in it out of the inside pocket, and then wrung the coat out. I took off my trousers and wrung them too, and then my shirt and underclothing. I slapped and rubbed myself and then dressed again. I had lost my cap. Before I put on my coat, I cut the cloth stars off my sleeves and put them in the inside pocket with my money. My money was wet, but all right. I counted it. There were 3,000 and some lira. My clothes felt wet and clammy, and I slapped my arms to keep the circulation going. I had woven underwear and did not think I would catch cold if I kept moving. They had taken my pistol at the road, and I put the holster under my coat. I had no cape, and it was cold in the rain. I started up the bank of the canal. It was daylight, and the country was wet, low, and dismal-looking. The fields were bare and wet. A long way away, I could see the campanile rising out of the plain. I came up onto the road. Ahead, I saw some troops coming down the road. I limped along the side of the road. They were past me and paid no attention to me. They were a machine gun detachment going up toward the river. I went down on the road. That day I crossed the Venetian plain. It was a low, level country, and under the rain it was even flatter. Toward the sea there are salt marshes and very few roads. The roads all go along the river mouths to the sea, and to cross the country you must go along the paths beside the canals. I was working across the country from the north to the south and had crossed 2 railway lines and many roads, and finally came out at the end of a path onto a railway line where it ran beside a marsh. It was the main line from Venice to Trieste, with a high, solid embankment and solid roadbed and double track. Down the tracks away was a flag station, and I could see soldiers on guard. Up the line there was a bridge over a stream that flowed into the marsh. I could see a guard to the bridge. Crossing the fields to the north, I had seen a train pass on this railroad, visible a long way across the flat plain, and I thought a train might come from Portogruaro. I watched the guards and lay on the embankment so that I could see both ways along the track. The guard at the bridge walked away up the line toward where I lay, then turned and went back toward the bridge. I lay and was hungry and waited for the train. The one I had seen was so long that the engine moved it very slowly, and I was sure I could get aboard it. After I had almost given up hoping for one, I saw a train coming. The engine, coming straight on, grew larger slowly. I looked at the guard at the bridge. He was walking on the near side of the bridge and on the other side of the tracks. That would put him out of sight when the train passed. I watched the engine come nearer. It was working hard. I could see there were many cars. I knew there would be guards on the train, and I tried to see where they were, but keeping out of sight, I could not. The engine was almost to where I was laying when it came opposite, working and puffing even on level, and I saw the engineer pass. I stood up and stepped up close to the passing cars. If the guards were watching, I was less suspicious objects standing beside the track. Several closed freight cars passed. Then I saw a low open car of the sort they call gondolas coming, covered with canvas. I stood until it had almost passed, and then jumped and caught the rear hand rods and pulled up. I crawled down between the gondola and the shelter of the high freight car behind. I did not think anyone had seen me. I was holding to the hand rods and crouching low, my feet on the coupling. We were almost opposite the bridge. I remembered the guard as we passed him. He looked at me. He was a boy and his helmet was too big for him. I stared at him contemptuously and he looked away. He thought I had something to do with the train. We were past. I saw him still looking uncomfortable, watching over the cars pass, and I stopped to see how the canvas was fastened. It had grommets and was laced down at the edge with a cord. I took out my knife, cut the cord, and put my arm under. There were hard bulges under the canvas that tightened in the rain. I looked up and ahead. There was a guard on the freight car ahead, but he was looking forward. I let go of the handrails and ducked under the canvas. My forehead hit something that gave me a violent bump, and I felt blood on my face, but I crawled in and lay flat. Then I turned around and fastened down the canvas. I was in under the canvas with guns. They smelled clean of oil and grease. I lay and listened to the rain on the canvas and the clicking of the car over the rails. There was a little light coming through, and I lay and looked at the guns. They had their canvas jackets on. I thought they must have been sent ahead from the Third Army. The bump on my forehead was swollen, and I stopped the bleeding by lying still and letting it coagulate. Then picked away at the dried blood over the cut. It was nothing. I had no handkerchief, but feeling with my fingers, I washed away where the dried blood had been with rainwater that had dripped from the canvas, and wiped it clean with the sleeve of my coat. I did not want to look conspicuous. I knew I would have to get out before they got to Mestre, because they would be taking care of these guns. They had no guns to lose, or forget about it. I was terrifically hungry. That concludes chapter 31 of book 3. So a few quick facts. The Tagliamento is a river that runs basically north and south. It comes out of the southern Alps, and it flows all the way to the Adriatic Sea and cuts across northern Italy. It's located about 20 miles west of Udine, so that's about 35 kilometers. Mestre, what he's talking about, is a suburb of Venice, so it's southeast of the Tagliamento River. It's farther southwest on the coast of the Adriatic Sea. An eddy, if you don't know, is a circular current that flows inside of a river. It usually flows opposite of the main river flow, so it's kind of like a swirl that he obviously got caught up in. It's usually formed behind some kind of an obstacle, like a big rock or a bend in the river. And the swirling pockets of water can create a calm, and sometimes with the water even flowing upstream, and they're usually at the edges of a faster current. La Tisana is a town on the Tagliamento River in northeastern Italy, but it's south of San Vito, I think about 15 miles south, or 25 kilometers. So San Vito is another town on the Tagliamento River in northeast Italy. When he was talking about how he saw a campanile, it's basically a bell tower, so he knew there was some kind of a town close by. The campanile is usually on top of a church building or an important building of some kind. The gondola that he's referring to is just an open rail car. It's usually just a bottom floor with short sides. It's for transporting loose freight, and they usually have some kind of a canvas cover to protect the contents from exposure to the elements. And when he was talking about the railroad, where he met up with it was in between Trieste, which is the port city on the east coast of the Adriatic, and Venice is the port city on the west coast. So it was like somewhere right in the middle of those two locations. And so when he meets up with the railway, he's like, 60 miles from Venice. Portogruaro is another town in northeastern Italy. It's just south of San Vito. And the train that he first saw would have probably been traveling from Venice toward Trieste, but the one he caught was going in the opposite direction towards Venice. And a grummet, if you don't know, it's just a ring that's clasped into metal so that you can tie ropes and fashion down the canvas. Or it's like, I guess if you're holding an oar in a rowboat, but that's what a grommet is. So those are all the quick facts I have. My impressions the irony is really thick in this story. I'm pretty sure that's purposeful. Right, if you remember back 2 chapters, Frederick had shot that man for deserting. And now he's officially a deserter himself. I mean, since the beginning of the story, he's been clearly in over his head, or at least that's the way it was written, that he didn't know what the hell he was doing. And now he's running for his life from the very same people that he volunteered to help in this war. I think that's rich with irony and tragedy, of course. It's a tragic love story, so I guess that makes sense. But I think it's interesting. Some people get their karma really quick in this life. And from what I learned about Hemingway himself, he really fits that category. It seemed like every bad thing he ever did, he got paid back immediately for. And I think that's probably some of his autobiography reflected in the story of Frederick Henry. I think it's interesting that he managed to save over $3,000, or 3,000 lira, sorry. That seems a little far-fetched, but again, the story is really sparse, so there's a lot that the author chooses not to divulge. But it doesn't really make sense, because he spends money like there's an endless flow of it. But they did mention that he got drafts from his grandfather or something, and it was only a few $100s at a time. So I don't know how he was able to save up money. Anyway, a bit more context in that regard would be helpful. I think it's also kind of interesting that Catherine and their baby couldn't be farther from his mind. And I guess that's rightfully so. If your basic needs are not being satisfied, meaning you're not safe, as humans, we don't really concern ourselves with other needs like love and belonging. But I really find it interesting that the contrast of his current situation is so different from his previous circumstances, and it makes his behavior in the past seem really foolish in hindsight. I mean, I guess he was living his best life, whatever, in the middle of a war. But he operated as if nothing mattered to him. And now he's on the precipice of losing his life. Hopefully he's on the verge of a major breakthrough. Maybe he's on the verge of a breakdown. I don't know. I like to be more optimistic. Maybe it's a breakthrough. I guess we'll see. But anyway, that's all the impressions I have for chapter 31 of book 3. In the next episode, we'll pick up where we left off with chapter 32 of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. Please join me again for more teen bedtime stories. I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for listening.